Today's daf is Shabbat daf Kaf. We're actually going to finish the first parak of Shabbat today and start the second parak, which is very exciting. Today's shir is sponsored by Susie Handelman, Shana Sarah Bat Miriam, in honor of all the brave and wonderful medical personnel taking care of coronavirus patients in Israel and around the world. May the learning be in their merit, give them divine assistance and protection. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu strengthen their hands in healing and help the scientists find the cure. And by Ani Schiffmiller for Fuah Shlema of Tzvi Ben Frida. Okay, today we're going to start with the Mishnah at the bottom of Yud Tet Amud Bet. We're going to finish the last section of things that one can or can't do before Shabbat. Ein solim basar batzal ubetzah ela kedei sheyitzolu miba'od yom. One cannot roast meat, an onion, and an egg. I'm not sure why specifically these three were chosen. Maybe they were the most common things that people roasted. Ela kedei sheyitzolu miba'od yom. They need to be roasted from Friday before Shabbat starts. Ein nutznim pat letanur im chashecha. I want to point out there's two different terms used here. One is miba'od yom, which means while it's still daytime, and one is im chashecha, with darkness. Now this seems like you would have assumed it would have said the same thing in both, miba'od yom and im chashecha. Im chashecha sounds like a later time than miba'od yom. Miba'od yom is when it's still day, and im chashecha sounds like as it gets dark. What's interesting here is that it could be that this Mishnah is made up of different things that came in different time periods. So that we have miba'od yom, and we also have misha chashecha, im chashecha, and it could be that that we generally bring in Shabbat early because of Tosefet Shabbat, and we're worried about the whole time of Ben HaShemashot. And it could be that in an earlier time, they actually didn't bring in Shabbat as early as we do. And the Im HaShecha was still not Shabbat yet. And it could be that that's what's happening here, and that the Mishnah is made up of two different parts that came from two different traditions or two different time periods, which is a possibility. Okay, moving on. So we can't put bread in the oven as it gets dark. They need to already get dark, right? We know with bread, when you cook bread, or charara is some sort of cake, so it needs to start browning. As long as it's brown, yikramu paneha. Now, paneha sounds like on all sides. This is going to be against what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer omer kadesh yikom hatachton shela. The bottom part needs to be, but not the top part. Okay, so as long as the bottom part is brown, we're going to have to see in the Gemara what exactly is the bottom part. Mishalshalin et haPesach batanur im chashecha umachizin et haor b'midurat beit hamoked. So after we had a list of all things that we can't do, we're now going to have a list of things that we can do. So you're allowed to put the Korban Pesach in the oven while it's dark. Okay, again, this means before it's dark, but again, it could be that earlier they would bring in Shabbat a little bit later than we do. In any case, it means before Shabbat. You can put the Pesach in the oven even if it's not fully roasted, meaning you could put it in without worrying. You could kind of set up this fire that they had in the Beit HaMoked. That was in the Beit HaMikdash. They had a fire that was going in this room called the Beit HaMoked. It was a place where the Kohanim would sleep, and they would also they would use this fire to warm themselves up. The floors were very cold. They would walk on the floors barefoot, and they needed warming. So they would put this fire there in the Beit HaMoked. So that you could do also before Shabbat. Ubigvulin, gvulin is places outside the Beit HaMikdash. Kadesh tochaz ha'or berubo. Okay, this is an order. It has to be, if you're going to do some sort of fire outside the Mikdash, it has to be, and here we're talking more like a bonfire. The flame has to be have already caught on to most of the fire, most of the twigs. We're going to talk exactly most of what. It's not exactly clear. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'pchamim kol shehu. If you have coals, then it doesn't matter. If it's a little bit into the coals, that's fine, because again, our concern about all these things in the Mishnah is shema yachted, you might stoke the coals, and because of that, we're worried specifically about cases where you'll stoke the coals with if you have specifically pacham, okay, which is we call it these are what we normally call coals, the pacham. Should try to look for the word exactly, but if you have pecham, then we're not worried because it keeps the fire well, and therefore we're not worried that you're going to actually stoke the coals. Okay, pcham, yeah, it's just coals, right? It's tricky because we always talk about shemei yetavan chalim or the coals, but these are specifically a certain type of coals that we don't have to worry. Vikama. So now we start with the Gemara. Now we have to have more definitions about everything we mentioned in the Mishnah. So it talks about you can't roast your meat, your onion, your egg, except it, right, as long as it's roasted miba oyom. Now, what does it mean roasted? How fully roasted does it have to be? Obviously, if it's roasted, you're not really leaving it on the fire. So it must be some stage along the way. So famous answer, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rav, Kadesh yitzolu miba oyom k'ma'achal ben drosai. It has to be like the ma'achal of ben drosai. Now, who is ben drosai? He was apparently, Rashi says he was a listimaya, he was a robber, and because he would be always on the go trying to steal something from one to the next, I guess, he wouldn't cook his food very long, and he ate his food somewhat raw. So now we're going to say, so the way he ate his food, and Rashi says, bishulo shlish. It would be a third of the way cooked. That's sufficient for it to happen. So now we're going to say, wait a minute. Before we get to that, I want to point out that the Rambam thinks it's actually half of the way cooked. Okay, there's a big machloket about ben drosai. Is it half of the way cooked or a third of the way cooked? I don't know exactly how one measures, right, when one's cooking before Shabbat to make sure it's half or third. I don't know exactly where one would come up with the difference, but you can imagine, right, let's say it's supposed to cook an hour, so then you can do it like that. So this is why does everybody know this? Because it's a very important basic halacha when it comes to bishul on Shabbat. When you cook on Shabbat, things have to be before Shabbat. If you're going to leave something in the oven, it has to be at least a third or a half of the way cooked. Itmar nami, it was also said, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol shu k'machal ben drosai, ein bo mishum bishulei nochalim. Okay, if it's machal ben drosai, now this is a totally different issue. This is when a non-Jew, you're not allowed to have a non-Jew cook food for you, right? If you eat food that a non-Jew cooked, there's a problem with bishul akum. There's all sorts of ways we get around this in certain situations, but we have bishul akum. Now, how we define bishul, something cooked, affects whether something's going to be asur mishum bishul akum. So, for example, if I cook something a third of the way, and then comes the akum and the non-Jew, and they cook it the rest of the way, so I already cooked it enough that it's considered that I cooked it. Okay, whereas if the non-Jew comes in first and cooks it, then it's going to be a problem. But if I've cooked it a third of the way or half of the way, depending on if you hold by Rashi or the Rambam, then that already means that I can do it. So there we have the exact same issue of machal ben drosai being relevant in a different halacha. Tanya, now we have a braita. Hananya omer, kol shu k'machal ben drosai, mutar lashoto al gabei kira, va'af al pi she'en grufa uktuma. Okay, all of a sudden they add in something that they assume you know what this is talking about. Grufa uktuma. Grufa is that you've swept the coals to the side, and ktuma is that you've put ashes on top of the coals. This is generally something someone would do when it's later, when they're done kind of with the fire. Right? Imagine you do a bonfire on Lag BaOmer, and then people pour water over it to get it to go out. So the same thing, this is what they would do when they were kind of done with the fire. If you would do grufa uktuma, this would allow any kind of cooking, because the assumption is you're not going to stoke the coals anymore because you've already done an act that shows that you're not really interested anymore in cooking. So now let's go back to the beginning of this braita. Hananya says, if it's machal ben drosai, you can leave it. Mutar lashoto al gabei kira. You can leave it on the kira even if it's not grufa uktuma, meaning, right? Well, you have to understand what grufa uktuma was to understand this line. You don't need to do the grufa uktuma acts in order to allow it, whereas normally if you would cook something and it wasn't fully cooked, if you did grufa uktuma, then you could actually leave it without worrying. So there's all different ways, even though one's not allowed to leave things if they're not cooked, there's all different ways you can get around it. Grufa uktuma, or if it's partially cooked, then it's already okay. Okay, moving on. We're now at the 2 dots, about 10 lines from the top. Ein notnim et hapat. So now we have this issue of the pot. We had a machloket in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said you can't put it on the chalim unless all the sides are browned. And then we have Rabbi Elazar who said, no, just the bottom. Now you have to remember what their ovens looked like in those days. Okay, there were these wide ovens at the bottom, narrow at the top. As we talked about in the past, they would put the bread on the sides of the oven. So now the question is, what is tachton? If they're stuck on the sides of the oven, what's considered tachton? So the Gemara is going to ask, Ibailahu tachton he'ach legabe tanor, or dilma tachton he'ach legabe ha'or? Is it Bottom meaning, well, the fire's at the bottom of the oven. So is it the bottom? If it's up against the wall of the oven, then it would just be the bottom part, right? That's facing the bottom of the oven. If you say bottom, what's attached to the oven is the bottom, even though it's really on the side, maybe that's it. So which one is it? So they're going to say, Tashma, let's learn from this other source. Rabbi Lezer Omer, Kadesh Yikumu Paneh Hamuvdakim Hamidubakim Batanu. Okay, Rabbi Lezer says in a different source, again, here you have that there were a lot of Brightot. Again, Brightot were sources from the Tannaitic time period that were kind of circling around, and people would say, oh, I know this source, right? So our Mishnah says it in one way. There was a different source that worded it differently. And from that wording, we can really understand better what he means. Because there it says, Kadesh Yikumu Paneh, that are stuck to the oven. So there it means it's clear that it's the part on the side that's stuck to the oven and not the part that's in the bottom underneath the fire. Mishalshalina to Pesach. Okay, why do we allow to Mishalshalina to Pesach? Why do we allow specifically when it comes to Korban Pesach? Now remember, we're talking about if Pesach falls out on Friday night. If Pesach falls out any other night, then obviously you're allowed to cook because it's Yantiv, and one can cook on Yantiv. The issue is when Pesach comes out on Friday night, can you put it in the oven right before Shabbat or, any time before Shabbat, even if it's not fully cooked, and you can. So the question is why? My time, Mishum de b'nei chavura zrizin hein. Because the people that are part of the chavura, what's a chavura? Well, when they did the Korban Pesach, you had to be part of a group. You had to be designated from before that you're going to eat together in this group with this group of people, and this is going to be your Pesach, the sacrifice that you're going to eat, the animal. So because it's done in a chavura, there's an assumption, and also I think because it's Pesach, that people are very careful about it, and no one's going to come and stoke the coals on Pesach night, right? This is kind of the theory that maybe you're not careful all the time, but when it's a holiday or something special, you might be extra careful. I think because the Bnei Chabura were really everybody. It wasn't like they were unique individuals, but I think it's just a sense that you're doing it for Pesach, and therefore people are careful. So now they say, wait, halav hachilo, if it weren't for that, you wouldn't be allowed to do this. Doesn't this match something we talked about the other day, which is hamarmar, gadya, ben shrik, ben lo shrik, shapir dami. Do you remember we had this case of the gdi? You have a goat, and whether you seal the oven or you don't seal the oven, what do we say? The wind can get in, right? And it can ruin it, and therefore no one's going to open the oven because the meat is very soft. And the meat of the Korban Pesach was right now, it could be a gdi. We don't, right? It's a lamb, but it could be, right? It says in the Torah, mina kfasim or mina yizim. It could be anything from that family, and therefore, right, from the sheep, goat, etc. family. And since the meat is generally soft, therefore, there shouldn't be a concern that you're going to be yaftev chalim. So it shouldn't matter if there's reason, it should be allowed because of what we learned the other day. So what do they answer? No, there's a difference in the cut of meat. Hatam mintach, hachat lo mintach. When we were talking about the gdi that you were roasting the other day and you wouldn't open the oven, that's when you're talking about a slice of meat, like you have a piece of steak. But the Korban Pesach wasn't roasted that way. It wasn't like they had slices of steak and they put them to roast on the fire. They roasted the animal in its entirety. When you roast the animal in its entirety, even if the meat is soft kind of meat, a little bit of wind getting in is not going to have any effect, and therefore it's clear that that wouldn't help, and that's why they need to say zrizin. Okay, now we're almost halfway down the page. Ma'achizin et ha'or. Okay, now we're talking about in the Beit HaMoked, and now we're going to get to, I see someone wrote on the chat about the difference in the Beit HaMikdash and Malacha in the Beit HaMikdash. So now we're going to talk about this. One can put up this fire in the Beit HaMoked before Shabbat without wearing Shema Yachteh. So the Gemara says, Minani Mile, where do we get this from? Amar Rav Huna, Lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvotechem. You can't light a fire in the places where you dwell. Now, the Beit HaMikdash is not a place where people dwell. So, b'chol moshvotechem iatam avir. So Rav Huna says we can infer from here, specifically in places where you live. Avalatam avir b'midurat Beit HaMoked. But you can in the Beit HaMoked. Okay, meaning that now this is a little bit strange because this sounds like you can even light it on Shabbat. Okay, now there's a whole thing that in the Beit HaMikdash, we don't have any D'Rabbanan halachas. Okay, D'Rabbanans are suspended in the Beit HaMikdash for sacrificial purposes, or even D'Oraitas. For sacrificial purposes, even D'Oraitas, right? We can slaughter animals that we don't normally do on Shabbat. And also there's a concept that there's really no Rabbanans in the Beit HaMikdash. Now this is saying you can actually light a fire in the Beit HaMikdash, which would sound even like you could burn it. So, but he's just saying this shows that you can light it from before Shabbat without a problem. So now, Matkifla Rav Chisda questions and says, Ihachi afilu b'Shabbat nami. So then it sounds like even on Shabbat, as I just said, it sounds like you could light it on Shabbat. And this is only saying you could light it before Shabbat. So El Amar Rav Chisda, Kra ki ata l'mishrei evarim uptarim hudata. No, Rav Huna, you brought the wrong pasuk, or you brought a pasuk in the wrong manner. The pasuk that says that you're allowed to light a fire in the Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat is talking about for sacrificial purposes, not for warming the feet of the Kohanim, right? This is a good example of how far do you take a heter, right? Do you say, oh, once it's allowed in the Beit HaMikdash, we could do anything? No. Lo tavar u'esh b'chomash v'techem basically comes to say, well, you can light it in the Beit HaMikdash to burn the evarim u'ptarim. These were the parts of the animal that get burnt on the fire. What they're trying to say is not even just for sacrifices. Sacrifices, we have other psukim, but the parts that get left that are kind of finished during the day, and then you want to burn them overnight. So those parts that are left to burn for the long term, so that they're usually done at nighttime, that you can light even on Shabbat. Like let's say it's Friday night and you don't have enough fire, you're allowed to light the fire for that, even though it's not the main sacrifice, it's kind of an accessory to the sacrifice, and that's allowed. But it certainly wouldn't allow, right? And then that explains why it doesn't allow us to light the fire in the Beit HaMoked. So now the question becomes, okay, so if we don't have that heter of lighting a fire, then why are we allowed to do it before Shabbat without worrying about stoking the coals? So now they give a different answer, which is exactly like the previous answer, which is ukohanim zrizim hein. The reason is because the kohanim are very careful about things, especially in the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, we're not worried that they're going to stoke the coals, and therefore we allow it in the Beit HaMoked. So now those last two answers are connected, right? The last two things we saw, which is the Mishalshalin et HaPesach Batanor, the two heterim we have, and the Machizim et Ha'or Udurat Beit HaMoked, both are because of the Zrizim, because people are careful. So we have situations where if we know someone's going to be careful, then we can allow it. This is interesting because we had the thing with Shema Yateh with the Nair, right? And we kind of said, well, we said, we know when there's certain situations, people are going to be checking on the other and they won't come to forget. So it's kind of similar to here. Ubigvulin Kadesha Tochaz. Now, outside the Beit HaMikdash, it has to have already gotten to the majority of the bonfire. So my Ruban, Amarav, Rov Kol Echad Be'echad. So now we're going to have Machloket Rav and Shmuel. What is Rov? So Rav says it has to get to Rov of every stick in every tree, every piece of wood in the fire. Ushmuel Amar Kadesha Lo Yomru Habe Eitzim V'Naniach Tachtehen. When you've gotten to the point in your bonfire where you no longer have to say, go bring more wood, okay? Where you have enough wood that you can keep going. So in that situation, we can say that's enough. It doesn't necessarily have to get to every piece of wood there. As long as the fire is going strongly enough, then we're not worried. Tana Rav Chia, L'siyuei L'shmuel. Rav Chia brings a brighter now to support Shmuel's opinion. Kedei shetehei shalhevet olam eleha. Okay, so this sounds like the same thing as Shmuel, which is as long as the flame is going on its own and not because of something else that you're adding in. So it sounds like the same as long as it's set up properly, then it's fine. And it's, the fire's going well. Okay, today we're just to kind of take a break for a second. We're having very short sections, right? We keep going from one section to another, and that's going to basically be throughout, even in the next parak. Also, a lot of definitions and trying to define what we mean by things that were said in the Mishnah. Okay, next one. If you haven't opened the sheet yet, you can open the sheet and look inside. There's a sheet for today's stuff, so it'll help you follow, even though it's not so complicated to follow because it's pretty simple sugyot. Okay, now we have, what about eitz yichidi? What if you have one branch or one piece of wood that you lit on fire? So how much do we say is enough that we don't have to worry you're going to come to start stoking or adding? So Rav Amar Rov of Yo, v'Amre la berov hakifa. Here we have two different opinions, but they're two different opinions about what Rav actually said. Is it Rov of Yo, the majority of the thickness? Now I think there's different ways you can explain this. Okay, so if I'll take this cup, it's cylindrical. Okay, so now or maybe my arm is better. Okay, so Rov, do you take Rov ovyo, we would say, right, you would need like the whole top half of my arm or the whole bottom half of my arm. Or theoretically, you could say it got to the inside of the wood and it went from my fingers all the way up to, halfway through my arm. Okay, that maybe the fire wasn't here at all, but it had gotten through, it had eaten through the entire thing over here. Rov hakef would be the circumference. Means the fire just has to be on the outside. So again, does it mean the outside on half, like going one way, or the outside of half of it? Right. In other words, either just the top part along the whole length of the log, or maybe it means on more than half of the log, but all around the circumference, but yet it didn't get inside. Okay, that's how I understand it. Amar Rav Papa, here we have an interesting Rav Papa. If you remember Rav Papa, we've seen him a bunch of times where we saw in Brachot, where there was one version of saying something and another version, and he said, well, let's put them both together. He was very into bringing opinions together. So here he says there's two different opinions of Rav. Amar Rav Papa, Hilkach be'inam rov of yo be'inam rov hakefo. He says, well, let's just be machmir here. Let's require everything. You need both that and that if you want to leave this before Shabbat. Kitanai, now they're going to say the opinions of Rav are the same as the Machloket Tanaim. In other words, the earlier people debated this also. Rabbi Chia Amar Kadesh Yishachet ha'etz mimelechet ha'uman. If the wood is already not usable for someone who's a worker who would use, a specialist who would use this, so that would need rov ovyo because it would kind of eat through the wood. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera Omer Kadesh Tuchaz Esh Mishnei Tzadav. As long as the fire is on both sides, this sounds a little more like rov hakefo because it's just on the sides. And even though we don't have proof that the fire getting just on the outside is really significant, we can have a zecher l'davar. There's a hinting to it in a verse. Et shnei ktzotav achla ha'esh v'tocho nachal hayitzlach lemelacha. Okay, here it says if both of the sides were eaten, okay, were kind of burned, which sounds like just the outsides were burned, and yet you can still use that for working purposes. So this seems to indicate that both sides burning would already be considered significant. It's not exactly a proof, but okay. Now that we talked about fire in Psukim, we're going to go a little bit off topic as usual, and the Gemara is going to bring some other pasuk that has to do with fire. They're going to try to explain what this means. V'ha'ach lefanav miva'eret. Okay, so my ach, what is this ach? So now this is something, got burned in the fire. What is this ach? Amarav, achvena. Achvena, they say, is arava, like one of the four minim that we take on right, the willow branch is the arava. So it's the willow branch that it will basically be burned up. Ushmuel amar etzim shenidleku ba'achvana. We're talking about trees, wood that was burned in achvana, which is they came together. Some people say it means a medura, some sort of bonfire where kind of all the trees are, all the wood is together. Rashi says, ba'achva, it's like a nice image, kol ha'etzim nidlakim ze mizeh, hakatam madlik hagadol, right? It's when they're all piled on top of each other and one kind of, they're all friendly, they're all together, right? Things we're trying to avoid nowadays is that they all kind of, right, like get the other sick, right? It's the same idea, right? They're all together here. What's this, by the way? This is in the context of Yirmiyahu, where there was right, this I think is the Megillah, or is that coming up later? Yeah. This is B'Sreifati Hoyakim HaMegillah Ktiv. There was this case where Yirmiyahu brought this Megillah to, I don't remember the details, but to Hoyakim, and then he burnt the Megillah, and it was a reference to what will happen in the time of the destruction. Okay. Hahud Amar Lehu Mahai Man Bai Achvana Ishtakach Arvata. So now they want to prove one of the opinions, and they say, we're going to prove Rav, because there was a case where somebody said, who wants to buy Achvana? And what was he doing? It turns out he was selling aravot. So here you have that it's willow and that it's not the second opinion of Shmuel. This just supports Rav's opinion. Again, there could be two interpretations, but at least it supports Rav's interpretation. Amar Rav Huna. Kanim, now we're going to talk about kanim, which are reeds, and we're going to talk about date pits. Now, these were both used for fire. And the question is, in which case are we worried that, in which case are we going to need rov? And in which case are we not going to need rov before Shabbat? Because even though we don't have rov, we're not really worried about stoking the coals. So, Amar Rav Huna, 6 lines from the bottom. Kanim ein tzrichim rov, agdan tzrichim rov. If you have reeds separate, you don't need rov, because think about reeds. Reeds burn very quickly, so we're not really worried about anything happening. If you have agdan, if they're together in a pile, then srichim rov. Then it's going to be harder for them to all be burning, and we need them to be together. Okay, we're going to talk about, maybe someone's going to say the opposite. Okay, it's helpful today actually for this. If you look in the chart, it'll help you follow, because there's going to be 3 different opinions about these things. Garinim, if you have date pits, ein srichim rov, also like the kanim, they burn quickly. They're highly flammable, so it's not an issue. But nitanam bechotalot, if you put it in a basket, the concept is, and it's interesting, because with fire you think the more there is, the bigger the fire is, but here they're kind of saying no. The more there is, the harder it is for them all to burn, and therefore it's going to take longer, and therefore you might actually end up stoking it. So if they're bechotalot in baskets, srichim rov. Matkefla Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, what are you talking about? Adrabah, ipcha mistabra. The opposite is true. Kanim mivadran, agdan lo mivadran. If they're separate, then they're going to end up really spreading out. And if they spread out, they're not going to burn so well. But if they're together, then they're not scattered. And then all the more so, the fire is going to be much stronger. There's less of a concern. And the same thing with garinim. Garinim, if they're separate mivadran, they're going to separate. And the more they separate, the less likely they'll be to go on fire. Nitanan, and you might need to stoke them. Nitanan l'chotalot lo mivadran. They're kind of together. They'll all burn up in fire. So that's 2 opposite opinions, whether together is stronger fire, right, less likely to stoke, or the reverse. Itmar nami, here's a 3rd opinion. Itmar nami usually means a proof for one of them. Here it's actually, maybe you could say it's a proof for either one, but it's not really a proof for either, because he has an in-between opinion. He's going to distinguish between the reeds and the date pits, which one can see. Why? Amarav kahana kanim she'agdan srichim rov. Lo agdan ein srichim rov. And why is that? Because I said they burn so quickly that if you put one reed on fire, it'll burn very quickly. You don't have to worry about it. But if you put them together, then it might be longer for it to burn. Whereas garinim srichim rov, garinim srichim rov, nitanam b'chotalot ein srichim rov. But garinim, date pits, are going to be harder to burn on fire if they're individual. If they're together, then all the more so they will. So therefore, they don't need rov if they're together. They do. So he has the, he kind of zigzags between the 2. Tane Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef brings a braita. Arba midurot ein srichim rov. Okay, there's 4 types of midurot. If you're making midurah with the following things, you also don't need rov. Because again, this is all about what's flammable and what's not. What's funny about this whole discussion is that it's a lead-in to bameh madlikin, which is all about with which oils we light fires and what burns better and what doesn't. So it's an interesting lead-in that we're spending all this time on different materials. So zephet, pitch, shel gafrit, sulfur, shel gvina, hard cheese. If you ever tried lighting a fire with hard cheese. Bishel revav, any kind of fatty materials. So all those are highly flammable, in which case we don't need rov for it to be an issue. We're not concerned that you're going to stoke it. B'manitatana, in the bright side, also adds af shel kash v'shel gavava. Okay, even straw and small little pieces of, like rakings of, like small pieces of twigs. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, it seems shel Babel ein tzrichim rov. Rabbi Yochanan says the trees in Babel, the wood in Babel doesn't need rov. Matkefla Rabbi Yosef, Mahi. Rabbi Yosef says, what are you talking about? What kind of trees? Ile masilte. If you're going to talk about little pieces of twigs, I was thinking, some people put out on their, right, there's those little chips, like little wood chips. So if you have little wood chips, hashta ptila amar ula hamalik tzarich she'adlik b'rov. If you're going to light a wick made of these twigs, then you're going to have to light the majority of it before Shabbat. Okay, so when it comes to wicks, hayotze silte mibaya. If you're gonna if you're gonna light the twigs themselves on fire, not use them as wicks, all the more so you're gonna need rope. So it can't possibly be that he's talking about that. Elam Rav Yosef shocha de arza. Okay, it's a branch from a cedar tree. And Rami bar Abba Amar Zaze. It's a hyssop branch of tree, very dry twigs, which will burn very quickly. Okay, so again, the details of which type and all that maybe aren't, again, if you're a very specialist in all these things, then you'll understand the differences between them. I personally am not such a specialist. I don't understand all the differences, which is going to create problems because the whole next chapter is going to be about all different types of oils and different types of woods and how they burn. And, for those of us who are not as familiar with all the different types of these things, it's going to be a little difficult, but we'll get through it. And okay, Hadron ala Yetziat Shabbat. And as I said, this is a real lead-in to the next chapter. In fact, you're going to see, it's kind of funny, we ended with this Shocha de Arza, and the first thing the Gemara is going to say is to define one of the first thing on the list as Shocha de Arza. So I think there was a clear intent here in the way it was written, that they wanted to end this chapter with all the fire that kind of leads into, again, a different topic about what we did touch a little bit on lighting on Shabbat with the Shema Yatet, but we didn't really get to that. And now we're getting to Bameh Madlikin. And again, we talked about the order. This makes sense that this is here in terms of order, because we're talking about all sorts of things that one does before Shabbat in preparation for Shabbat. Before we start with the details, I want to just talk about Hadlakat Nerot on Shabbat in general. Hadlakat Nerot on Shabbat in general is an interesting topic. We view Hadlakat Nerot as a chiyuv, right? You have to light candles. It's a mitzvah. It's something we do. We're obligated to. In those days, and I want to talk maybe pre-Mishnah time period, by the time of the Mishnah, it was clear that there was this thing about lighting candles, but as a mitzvah. But it's not so clear that it was always that way. And it could be that candle lighting started just so that they would have light, right? We don't light candles because we need the light, because we have lights. And in fact, what do you do if you're in a hotel and you can't light a candle? So you light on the light in your room. Right? You can actually do that. So, so the issue is that in those days, the candle lighting was really meant for lighting, to have light in your house. And it wasn't necessarily that it started as a mitzvah. From there, it kind of became that, oh, well, this is a mitzvah to do, right? It doesn't say in the Torah anywhere you have to light candles before Shabbat. So it's just interesting in terms of its development. You have to think about it, that there's issues going on here, and the issues about which candles first we're going to talk about what you can use for wicks, then we're going to talk about what you can use for oil, and all of that depends, it's all about, it has to be a nice fire, and it has to burn nicely. And why is that important? Because they needed it for light. And first of all, you wanted good light in your house, because otherwise it was pitch black, you couldn't see. And the second thing is that you also didn't want to come to Shema Yatet, right? That you want to start fixing it. If you fix it, you might put it out by accident. So because of that, they were very careful about which oils you could use and which you couldn't. And because of this, we're going to get into Hanukkah, right? Where obviously Hanukkah, you're not allowed to use the light. So they're going to start comparing, and these are the only dapim in the Gemara that we're going to get to soon that deal with Hanukkah. So it's nice, because in the middle of this tedious, which tree, which materials could be used for what, we end up with all these interesting sugyot about Hanukkah. Okay, Bameh Madlikin u'Bameh Ein Madlikin. This is a classic structure of a Mishnah. With what can you, with what can't you, and then they start saying Bameh Madlikin u'Bameh Ein Madlikin. Ein Madlikin, it's an ABBA structure. We're going to start with the things you can't, right? What you can, what you can't. Then it starts saying, okay, so this you can't, and then it's going to get to what you can. Ein Madlikin lo b'lechesh, lo b'chosen, v'lo b'chalach, v'lo b'tilat ha'edan. I should just break for a minute and just point out that, by the way, we say this Friday night in shul, right? And so I see someone asked a question about why it's brought up Friday night. So I read something in Safrai's book, in Mishnah Eretz Yisrael last night, where he kind of said that there became some issues between the Karaim and the Prushim about candle lighting. And it's possible that because of that, it kind of got into the davening, although it didn't get into the davening that early. So I'm not exactly sure. I didn't read it carefully enough. But anyway, maybe I'll try to look into it and see if I could come up with other reasons as to why this came up. I think it's pretty obvious, because it's the sugya that deals with Friday night. And that's, you're right at that moment. You've just accepted Shabbat, and it's exactly discussing, the issues, the halachic issues related to that. Well, one could have come up maybe with a different parak of Shabbat, but at least that explains why why some parak of Shabbat, but it does have to do with this. Hopefully after learning this parak, what's nice about learning this parak in depth, especially it has all these materials that we're not even sure what all of them are, it'll at least make it, when you read it on Friday night, sometimes it sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo, it'll make it make a lot of sense. So, okay, we're going to get in the Gemara into what all these things are. I'll already preface this by saying that the Gemara is going to say, until this point in the Mishnah, is all talking about wicks. And from here on in, we're moving into oils. Below b'zefet, below b'shava, below b'shemen kik, below b'shemen sreifa, below b'aliyah, below b'chelev. Since we're not going to get to these today, I'll kind of just give you some quick definitions. Not with pitch, not with shava, wax, not with shemen kik is castor oil, not with shemen sreifa. I'm not sure what the definition of shemen sreifa is. I think they'll define it in the Gemara. Not b'aliyah, that's the fatty part of the tail of the sheep. Not b'chelev, that's the fats in the animals, right? This is the fatty part of the animals that we don't eat. Nachum Amadai Omer, madlikim b'chelev mevushal, you can if you cook it first. V'chachamim omrim echad mevushal v'echad sheino mevushal and madlikim both. The rabbis say, no. Doesn't matter if it's cooked, not cooked, you can't. Okay, the Gemara starts off, lechesh. So what is lechesh? Shocha da'arza. Okay, again, it's from this shocha da'arza. This is the branch of the cedar tree. Shocha da'arza, it's ba'almahu. So then they say, what do you mean? It's an eight. You're talking about making wicks. You don't make wicks. Okay, this is the big question, right? You don't make wicks using a twig. What are we talking about here? So he says, the amranita de ipe. Underneath in between the bark and the tree itself, there's a woolly type of substance. Amranita is wool. It's not wool, but it's, the sibin, I forget what they're called, but it's like the woolly, it feels like wool under the bark. That's what we're talking about, okay? And that, it's not strong enough to make a good wick, and therefore you can't use it. Below b'chosen, Amar Rav Yosef, no'oret shel pishtan. This is the part of the flax that they would burn. Like again, it's this woolly type of substance. Amar Abai v'hakti v'haya chason l'ne'oret. But doesn't it say the chason became ne'oret, which means that chason and ne'oret are two different things. So, and you could read the parentheses or not read it. In either case, that's the meaning, which is michlal. From here, one can infer de chosen lav ne'oretu, right? But that's not chosen. They're two different things. Elam Rabbai, kitana didayek. It's the flax that they crushed. Okay, there were different processes they did. First, they soaked it, then they crushed it, then they combed it. So it's when it's crushed. Below nafitz, it's crushed but not yet combed. That's what they're talking about here. That's what the chosen is. Below b'chalach, Amar Shmuel, shaltinu lechol nechutei yama. Okay, here you see they didn't know what this was. The other ones they kind of knew. This one they said, wait a minute. We asked he says, I went down to the yam, because if you go down, the port is where there's people coming from all different places. And if you're not sure what something means, so you ask at the port. So, and you have to remember also, their language is Aramaic. So when it comes to the Hebrew, they know the basic Hebrew, but when it comes to some word that's not so commonly used, they don't really know what it is. So they go to the Nechutei Yama, the Amre Kulcha Shmei. They say it's called Kulcha, and it's a type of silk. Rav Yitzchak Bar Ze'eri Amar Gushkara. He says it's the psolet, the bad parts of the silk. That's what we're talking about, that they would make the wicks from. The waste kind of from it. Rav and Vabai have a yatvu kamei de Rav and Nehemiah, achva de Reish Galuta. They were sitting with, now it makes sense. He was the brother of the Reish Galuta, because that's where all the wealth is. If you're talking about silk, now it's someone who had money, who could afford the silk. Chazi davalavish mitaksa. They saw him wearing this nice silk clothing. Amrale Rav and Vabai, hayu kalach ditznan. He says that's kalach in our Mishnah. Okay, and that's it. This is like the Rav Soloveitchik and the halachic man, where he talks about, you see the sun setting and you think about, davening. So this is it, right? He said, that's it. That's the one in the Mishnah. Amalei Anna and Shira Parnida Karinanle. So Abai says, no, we call it Shira Parnida. Okay, not this. Okay, this is the silk. That's not what it was talking about. So now they say, Meitive, now they're going to question. Hashirayim v'hakalach v'asirikin chayabim b'tzitzit. So this is a question on Rabin, because that's what Abai says is, no, that's the nice silk, but what the kalach is the psolet of the silk. But Rabin said, no, it's the silk itself. So now the Braita here says that shirayim, which is silk, and kalach and sirikin are all chayavim b'tzitzit. These are different materials that require you to put tzitzit on them. These are considered clothing. So it sounds like shirayim is one, that's silk, and kalach is something else. So it makes it sound like it's not the same thing. So shira lechud v'shira pardina lechud. You could say these are two different types of silk, and what he was saying is this is one type of silk, and that's another type of silk, and that this type of silk is the shira pardina, and that's the silk that he thinks is what's mentioned in the Mishnah. So there's this debate about what it is. This is what we saw in the previous Amud, which was the willow branch. Okay, so you can't use willow branches to make the wicks. They were walking in the valley of Tamurita. Chazinu Pikta is Bikta. Okay, it's the same, the pay and the bet switch, just like right in Arabic. They also, right, they can't pronounce that properly, right? They're interchangeable letters. Chazinu Lahane Arbata, they saw a boat. Amarle Rabban Labaye, same thing. Hainu Idan. He says, Arbata is Aravot. Now, my confusion. He saw Aravot there in the Bik'ah, and he said, that's the Idan that's mentioned in the Mishnah, Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, right? He looks, he says, there it is. Amarle, Hahu Eitz Ba'almahu. He says, no, that's wood. That's not what it's talking about in the Mishnah. Again, what's the Mishnah talking about? The Mishnah is talking about making wicks. You don't make wicks out of wood. So what does he say? So Rabin now gets smart, and he says, Hu kalaf the achvele amranita de bene bene. He peels it off, and he shows him the woolly stuff underneath. He says, that's what I was talking about. Okay, again, it wasn't talking about the wood itself, but I was saying it's the wood, right? It's from that tree, and then they take that woolly substance and they turn it into wicks, and that's what you're not allowed to do. But again, that you're not allowed to use. The lob of tilat midbar. Okay, here they're not going to help us. They're translating into Aramaic, which doesn't help us, which is shivra. Okay, it's a type of grass. Below yeroka shalpanei mayim maihi. Now notice this. I don't know if you ever thought about this yeroka, but yeroka comes from yarok. It's the green stuff. It's the green mossy stuff in the water. So what type of green mossy stuff are we talking about? If you're talking about the type that goes on the water, that's very hard and it breaks. It's breakable. That would actually probably, I think the concept here is it would make a good wick maybe, because no, you can't make a wick at all. It's hard. It's kind of like the twigs, right? It's like saying that substance that you can't make wicks out of. Elamra papa uchmita de arba. It's the stuff that gets at the bottom of the boat. Okay, that's why I got confused. The arbata is the aravot, and here the arba is a boat. So it's the stuff that sticks at the bottom of a boat, right? The green mossy stuff in the water that if you're on a boat, it'll kind of stick and it'll go on the side of your boat. That's what we're talking about. Tan. Now we're going to have a brighto sipu alehen. Shel tzemer v'shel se'al. Okay, also wool and also hair they added to the list. Now, why didn't the Tan of our Mishnah have that in their list? Tana didan, semer mikpatz kavitz, se'ar ichluche michrach. Okay, these can't even make a wick. In other words, again, you have this range. You have things that can't be made into wicks at all. These things will, right, think about a hair. You light it on fire, it immediately burns. You can't make a wick out of that. Okay, so basically there's things that can't be made into wicks at all. We obviously don't need to put that in our list in the Mishnah. There's things, and that was the whole debate, right? What are you talking about? That you can't make a wick out of it. So then we have things that you can make a wick, but it's a bad wick. Those are the ones listed in our Mishnah. And then we're going to later have things that you can actually make the wicks out of. The lob is zephet. Okay, so now we're moving into the second part of the list, which is about which things you can actually use for oils. Zephet zifta. Okay, they're just telling us what it is. Shava kiruta. Again, these are just definitions in the Aramaic, right? We know zephet is pitch and shava is wax. Tana. Now there's a braita that was said about this Mishnah. Ad kam psul ptilot, mikam be'elach psul shmanim. Okay, from the first part of the Mishnah was ptilot. From here on in, we get to oils. So the Gemara says, pshita, isn't that obvious? Why are you telling us this? So they say, no, because shava itztri chaleino, because shava, wax could be used to make a wick. You can make a wick out of wax, or you could also use it as an oil. So the question is, which list is it on? Can you, if you put it on the second part of the list, then you're going to say that you can use it for wicks. So itztri chale. Ma'u diptema leptilot nami lo chazia kamashman. You might have thought maybe they're not worthy to be used for wicks. Kamashman came to teach you, no, you can use them for wicks, you just can't use them for oil. Okay, we'll stop here for today, and tomorrow we'll continue in this list of which oils and all that, and then we're going to get to Ner Hanukkah. So tomorrow, stay tuned.